Good evening and welcome along to this week's Ask TCW podcast live. Yes, good evening, everybody, and welcome along to this week's Ask TCW podcast. My name is Aaron Lord. The date is Wednesday, the 22nd of February. The Brits are on ITV, but who cares about music when you can listen to us talk and answer your questions that you've sent in this week, and thank you very much for doing that. Answering those questions this week are Andy Haywood.
Good evening.
Good evening. Antoine, Marie-Jeanne.
Good evening.
Good evening, Anne. And finally, it is Tina Taylor.
Hiya.
Hello, Tina. Wow. It's obviously the small matter of a Q&A last night with Neil Black from the Nottingham Panthers features in some of the questions. But before we get to those questions, we've had a question in from Gwen Fox, and Gwen says, I will quote from the McGrattan article in the Post. It's been real good fun. We train in the mornings and then you have lunch with a couple of the guys. That's your day. And it's nice. So Gwen says, is that where the problem lies? Are they over here for a fun time and couldn't care less whether they win or not? I have heard it said that extra gym sessions were optional. And it is clear to me that our guys are not fit enough. And then this name that we did hear at the Q&A pops up, and Gwen says, bring back Mark Coles for a start. So, Tina, I'll come to you first, ladies first. Obviously, the Q&A last night, you mentioned Mark Coles, but what do you think to Gwen's question and McGrattan's article?
Well, yeah, I mentioned Mark Coles, and because I arrived late, I missed the fact that it had already been discussed, so I felt like a bit of a tool when that was pointed out. So, but yeah, in terms of the article, I mean, I didn't really spot that, you know, the meaning, I suppose, behind that particular sentence that Gwen has picked up on. So. You know, I just sort of took it as read, really. So, you know, the way that she sort of pointed that out, and you know, just sort of backed it up with a couple of other opinions of hers. It's an interesting direction that you could read that in, and you know, it's no secret that, you know, we had Mark Coles on board, while, you know, during the season where we won the league title. And, you know, I think we can probably all say with a fair amount of confidence and no statistics to back it up, that's probably the year that we had the least amount of injuries, you know, I would imagine before or since. So it was obviously paying dividends having that sort of resource in process, you know, in place. So, I mean, I know Mark himself, he moved on to do other things. You know, he sort of went off to concentrate on his bodybuilding, from what I understand. So, you know, obviously Mark himself is possibly not an option. You know, if that's still the direction that he is going in, you know, in his personal life, then obviously that's what's going to take precedence for him. It would be nice to have somebody of his standard back at the club, because, you know, apparently there is a strength and conditioning person that the coaching staff are working with. But I think with the amount of injuries and the nature of the injuries we've had over the past few years, I would say that it's not really been up to scratch. You know, I mean, I don't. You know, we're all sort of very, you know, very vocal about sort of maligning the whole strength and conditioning ethos inside the Panthers organisation from the outside looking in. But it doesn't really seem to be good enough, to be honest. So, if it's correct, what's been heard, that extra gym sessions are optional, and your day finishes at lunchtime, and you sort of go off and do whatever you like. Maybe, that is an area that potentially wants looking at. Although, one thing I will say is that I suppose the Panthers' day is dictated by when they can get the ice for training sessions. So if you're going in there first thing in the morning, and then you may be doing your gym sessions after that, and then you're going for your lunch and stuff. It's you have to look after yourself 7 days a week, but you have to have some rest days as well. So it's interesting the way that question has come, but maybe a bit of context outside of that is possibly maybe a bit of expansion on the subject is maybe required, just to quell the gossip, if you will.
Andy, I'll come to you next. Just first of all, did you see the McGrattan article at all? In question. Okay. Just obviously on the quote, and the question of, are they over here for a fun time and couldn't care less whether they win or not? Obviously that is quite a strong question, and like Tina just says, every club trains at different times due to ice availability. So would you kind of associate the training in the morning, go for lunch, and then that's kind of your day over, with the fact that they couldn't care less whether they won or not? Do you mirror the two up together?
No, not especially. Obviously, there's all sorts of things that fall into line, like's been mentioned. When you get the ice time, what sessions you have in the gym, stuff like that, will all come into account. But I don't think, regardless of perceptions, I'm not entirely convinced that maybe not any players, because I imagine there's a couple on most teams where they have that feeling of I've done my bit, and if we win or lose, then fair enough. But I'm all right, Jack. But you look at the reactions of players when we won the Continental Cup. They don't look like they don't look like reactions of players that don't care if they win or lose. The same can be said when they lose a game. And yes, some players show it better than others. You think of someone like Mika particularly. To be fair, if he lets a goal in, he looks devastated most of the time. So after we've lost a game, he's rightly and usually furious. Whether that's with himself or with the rest of his team, we don't know. Obviously, we can make assumptions that it won't be himself. But it sort of comes into things like that. One of the things I will say is, and I don't know if it's changed since, but I seem to recall that some of the other teams in the league that have won it considerably more than we have didn't train every day. And I don't know if that's rumour. I don't know if it's true, but going on what I heard, going back probably best part of 5 to 10 years ago, I was led to believe that Belfast only trained 3 times a week and then played at the weekends. And
wow.
If that's true, and they've won the league and they've been fit, then fair play. Can you then question whether a team that trains 4 times a week and plays 2 at the weekend? It's all down to everything. And I think, we've had a lot of injuries. We've had a lot of injuries that probably wouldn't have been helped with a strength and conditioning coach. You think of, especially this season, you think of Jeff Dimon with his broken hand or finger, or whatever it was. You think of the past few years with the concussions we've had in the team. Dimon was one of them last year. Obviously, Stevie Lee's had his fair share. I think Cody Wilde was out with concussion a couple of years ago. And obviously Jeff Waugh last year with his broken rib. Their injuries that realistically a strength and conditioning coach can't change. He can't change someone blocking a shot with his ribs. You can't change a player slashing somebody's hand and breaking a finger, or a headshot that concusses someone. But we've also had our fair share of knee injuries, ligaments, shoulders, that kind of thing, which you would like to think that with a solid strength and conditioning regime would be limited. But it doesn't mean that they would all go away. So you think of a season like the year that we won it, Clarkey didn't start the season because he had shoulder injury. Jonathan Weaver broke his hand for a fair while. And yes, we were the fittest team, but we still had injuries. Obviously, who can forget Martin Tuma, who seemed to play one night and then he was out for 4 weeks. And then
he was Mr. Injury, wasn't he?
Yeah, and then all of a sudden he let's face it, his story didn't start off well when apparently it took him like 4 years to drive across Europe to get here, and everything broke down. He lost wheels and tyres and all that sort of thing. He was destined to be doomed from the outset. But we had injuries that year as well, but it's how you sort of combat it. It's not combating the injuries themselves. It's how you pull through. There's been games when we've been severely short-staffed, but the players, knowing that we're severely short-staffed, put in one hell of a shift, and you get one hell of a result. And then there's been other times where it's completely the opposite.
Okay. Well, we'll move on from Gwen's question, but thank you very much for that, Gwen. And if you have anything to say on what Tina and Andy have said about in relation to Gwen's question, or any of the questions that we do talk about throughout this show, then obviously you can get in touch with us, as you should know by now anyway. But get in touch with us via Twitter. Just use the hashtag AskTCW and send it to our handle, which is @CatsWhiskersTV. And we'll move on to another question. We've had quite a few questions come from Lee Constable via Facebook. So obviously Lee has got a lot of questions that he wants us to answer. So we'll move on to his first one. And Lee says, after last night's Q&A, Neil Black stated that the league is the main concern every season. And unfortunately, this season included the last 3 seasons, league campaigns have been poor, with us being out of it in February every year. Well, Lee, I think a few people might say it's even been earlier than that in some years. But do you think with Neil comments that next season is huge for the Panthers? He said the training camp is going to begin earlier, and with friendly games and the CHL in August happening, he wants us to be hitting the league running and hopefully catching other teams off guard. So, Lee says finally, can we afford another below-par league campaign for the 4th year in a row? Ant, I hope you're still there, and kick us off on this one. Can we afford another below-par league campaign for the 4th year in a row, Ant?
No.
That's concise. That was almost Andy Haywood concise.
That's the answers that we want. We'll move on to Lee's second question. No,
honestly,
I mean, I think obviously I think most Panthers fans would say no, but for you, Ant, obviously taking into everything that Neil Black, you were at the Q&A last night, so you heard that answer from Neil Black. But so, why do you think we can't afford another below par league campaign?
Well, it was clear to me that the league is the one thing that the Panthers want to win above all else. The fact that we're bringing, Neil talked last night, and if it happens, this is fantastic to start the training camp as early as possible, as early as that, and he quoted 2 high-profile pre-season friendlies in that first weekend, followed by another week of training, followed by 2 more friendlies, followed by another week of training when the CHL starts on that Thursday. That would be by far and away the best preparation for a season we've ever had. And he also specifically stated about getting the players in for that, all the players in for that training camp. And he even said that players that don't want to come in for training camp at that time won't be signed. They'll have to find a different job. That to me is refreshing. I mean, I've made a point of not going to the pre-season friendlies in past years because A, I don't want to go and see another Elite League team in a pointless friendly. B, I don't want to see a pointless friendly because it is a pointless friendly because the Panthers haven't got any players. You play in two lines maybe of your regular team and then, drafted in players from Peterborough and all sorts. So I think with that, and that will cost the club a fair bit as well, getting everybody in on time and getting them in early and what have you. So I think with the initial expenditure, and obviously this could be completely different based on the team that we sign, but the initial expenditure to me says they're laying it on the line, and it's like we need a performance next season. And I don't think I've ever been crazy enough to suggest that I think we should be winning the league every year. I just want us to compete. I don't want us to be out in November, December, January. Let's have a season where we're fighting it till the last weekend of the season would be fantastic. If you get beat then you've been beaten by a better team. Fair enough. As it is at the moment, we're just not very good.
Okie dokie. Andy, I'll come to you next. Obviously, you were again at the Q&A, and I think for obviously all of us, I think we'll probably end this Ask TCW podcast with just a short overview of what you thought of the Q&A and Neil Black and what he said. So, for the remainder, we'll try and stick to the questions. But, I mean, do you get a feeling that kind of what Ant was saying in the sense of Neil Black has said that he's going to lay everything on the line. So do you think that next season the league campaign is more important than any other league campaign that we've had over the last, 10 years or so?
No. I think it'll be just as vital as it always ever has been. I think realistically, you could argue that every year that we didn't win it, up until the year we did win it, was always bigger than what we're in now. Yes, it would have been nice to be able to push on and mount some more serious challenges. But for me personally, I would say that waiting 50 years is worse than, the 3 or 4 years since we've last won it. So I would imagine that at those points, every year prior to 2012, that season, you would say that they were the ones where the pressure constantly mounted. Don't get me wrong. I think from what he said regarding players coming in, players that are being retained, obviously the fact that he's pumping money into friendlies and a training camp, and obviously the CHL itself isn't cheap. Obviously, a lot is being laid on the line, and with that in mind, there's going to be pressure, and there's going to be added pressure, and probably pressure that's different to what we've had before. But I think ultimately the hoodoo and the monkey on the back with the whole 50 years thing would for me personally will always be sort of the bigger achievement than if, say, we won it next year. What I will say with regarding the training camp is, whilst I agree that you want people in for the start of it, and you certainly want as many people in as the start of it, I think realistically you can allow sort of, in my opinion, if players come in that first week, I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with it. The big problem that we will face will be the age-old getting the visas back, because no matter how how much you say we're going to get all the players in before the first day of training camp, there'll always be that one sneaky player who just strangely doesn't get his visa back in time and comes in November. It's an exaggeration, but at the end of the day, we've seen it so many times. And whether it's us, whether it's the player themselves, whether it is just bad luck, but seemingly we seem to get it, a lot more than a lot of other teams. It'll be interesting to see if that kind of attitude is held up, where if you're not in for the start of training camp, you're on your way out. And it'll be interesting to see, with that in mind, if that is the thing, and we start releasing, players that they're going to be coming in next week, and then strangely they visas don't turn up. Realistically, you're going to be questioning it, aren't you?
Potentially, yes. I think you could be right there. So I'll give you another Lee Constable question, Tina. So I'm coming to you next. Lee says, also, do you think our defence needs real improvements? Do you think we need better defencemen, potentially a tough presence at the back? I liked Kudrok. He seemed no nonsense and threw his body around. Another example I think of is Giants Vandermeer. Gives them great defence and a tough presence at the back. Lee says, I just feel sometimes our D are walked all over and sometimes are bullied, and we can let in cheap, easy goals by not being stronger or just trying to bully some forwards a bit. What's your view on that, Tina? I mean, is a D an area of concern for you and an area of somewhere that we should really look to improve on next season?
Well, to sort of come to the old cliche of defence wins you championships kind of thing. I think you should always be looking to improve your defence. Not everybody can have the Pittsburgh Penguins ethos of we can score more goals than you, so we don't need to worry what's going on at the back. Really, it doesn't really work like that. You need to have guys who can do the job and like Lee says, sort of get bullied. I think two of the surprises for me. I think one of the real shames is we couldn't tempt Brian Schmidt into another year. Him and Dimon had a really good partnership going by the end of last season. Dimon has started out well and has been injury ridden, unfortunately, this season. The thing that makes me the most sad is Jeff Waugh. I was really in Jeff Waugh's corner last year, and he's another one who's had an extended spell out with injury, and I don't think he's quite managed to get himself to where he was last season either. I think he was, he's one of our good guys. I think that one of the very first things I can remember Jeff Waugh doing when he arrived at the Panthers last season was a beautiful, clean, open eyes check on a Dundee player, I believe it was, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with the check, but I think the Dundee player was a little bit, because he was sort of sprawled out on the ice, going, "What the hell just happened there?" And it was good to see, that kind of clean presence on the ice. It is a bit of a shame we couldn't, that Kudrok wasn't able to stay. I think, he certainly had the size to get people out of the way of his netminder. He definitely had that going for him. What wasn't the quickest of guys, and I think you have to sort of watch that trade-off and balance your defensive corps when you have got somebody of that ilk. But as long as you do get the balance right, I think having somebody in your defensive lines who has got those sort of attributes is not a bad thing, as long as they can play and they know how to do their job. In terms of this season, you can say, yes, we definitely do need an upgrade on defence. I mean, for starters, we've had two forwards regularly playing on defence. Logan McMillan has switched back there, and Eric Lindhagen, who I think he has had much more of a spark about him in the limited time he's had playing as a forward, and I think we've missed that since he's had to switch back to being a defender. We had a very short little space of seeing, what he could actually bring to a forward line, and he developed a very quick and easy chemistry with McGrattan and Farmer, which, that line was, it was interesting, and I've really enjoyed watching it. So, yeah, in terms of defence, we need improvements, but it's not necessarily the fault of the players who we have in our defence. Just as like a summary, some of them aren't meant to be on defence, and some of them have just been unlucky. So I think we have quality in our defence, but I think we need to. We need to look after them. Definitely, we need to do everything we can to look after them, and I think that there's probably going to be a couple of guys who, we might unfortunately be saying Tatar to. I know there's a couple of them that are coming up to the end of their 2-year university courses, so there's less reason to keep hold of them. So yeah, I think improvements should always be aimed for, but I think we need a bit more balance, and we actually need defenders who play on defence.
It's a good way to end that. Sorry,
just to very quickly come in. I think the type of player that, particularly that Lee's sort of mentioned, like a Vandermeer, I think realistically the type of player that we're sort of crying out for, I'm not convinced that realistically these days there's many of them left. You look at the sort of defensemen that we've had in our past that sort of fit that mould. You'll look at Lepine, who's obviously got on to bigger and better things, Jason Beckett, Mike Rees, Brian Thompson. Unfortunately, in today's game, they don't make players like that. Players that forwards are genuinely scared to go, close to. Players that if the puck's in the corner, they're turning away from the puck because they don't want to get hit. And God forbid the player that went in front of Rastislav Rovnianek when Mike Rees was on the ice because you were getting hurt. And they don't make players aren't taught like that anymore because games changed. And yes, you still get big, strong, stay-at-home defensemen who will look after players and will protect the crease and things. But I think realistically, the type of player that we cried out for this year is one of those. A real sort of mean-streaked, nasty, but not talking like Brent Henley, sort of to the detriment of the team, nasty. Yeah. But he was going to take a 2-minute penalty for cross-checking early on in the game, but no player would go near the crease again for the rest of the game. That sort of player, rather than someone who was going to jump someone for no reason and get chucked out. But like I say, it would be great to get a player of that ilk, and certainly in terms of size, we've got Jeff Waugh, and obviously we had Kudrok as well. But realistically, both of those guys didn't really have that same sort of almost scare factor that a Brian Thompson or a Mike Rees had.
I mean, and obviously, I think Andy makes a good point in the sense of we talk about the game changing as a whole, and sort of that enforcer role is being phased out of ice hockey in many leagues across the world. Do you agree with the sentiment that Andy says about maybe defensemen are changing, and your Jason Beckett's, your Lepines, they just aren't around anymore? Do you agree with Andy on that one?
Well, I'm not as worldy when it comes to hockey as Andy is, but yeah, you just look around the league. Are there any sort of big standout defensemen there that of that ilk that are just nasty? The ones that, like Andy said, would make you look over your shoulder and what have you. I mean, I was gutted when Kudrok left because I was really warming to him. I thought he'd settled in well, and he was that big physical presence at the back that we needed. Not necessarily nasty, but he was just tough. He wasn't going to take any crap. And I just think, I mean, a couple of times during last night's game, I just looked around our team and I was like, my God, we're so small. And you can see sometimes it's nice having pace at the back, but we do get pushed off the puck an awful lot. And I just think with somebody, maybe one or two players that are, have just got that intimidation factor, they're just physically, big, but not necessarily a loony. I think that would have benefited definitely.
Okie dokie. I mean, for me, defence is an area that I do think we need to try and improve on. If there was a younger Jason Beckett out there, it would make my day, because he's a type of defenseman that I like to watch personally. He always went into the gritty areas, wasn't afraid to sort of get in there and get hurt at times, but he stood up for his teammates when needed to. And he was a gentleman off the ice as well, which was even better. But we shall move on, and we'll move slightly away from the Panthers, and we'll move very topical because there is a gentleman called David Sims, as some of you may know, and he did send a tweet out today, and we've had a couple of people ask a couple of questions regarding that. So we'll go to Deso Dark first, and they ask, what do you think Sims meant with his cryptic tweet today? So much debate from one little tweet. Now, the tweet basically says something about today is a bad day for ice hockey, and hopefully tomorrow will be a better day or something like that. Don't quote me word for word, but it's very similar. But go to see Sims's Twitter account, and you'll be able to see it. But and I'll start with you on this one, because you only had a quick answer on the previous one. But what do you think Sims meant by his tweet? We've had a little chat with it today on our WhatsApp group. But what do you think it actually meant?
KFC have pulled out the sponsorship deal. Well, I don't know. They're
stopping the Zinger Tower meal.
Yeah, my first thoughts went to import levels. If I'm honest, maybe they're abolishing import levels, or maybe they're reducing import levels, which would be a bit strange when we've got 2 more teams coming into the league next season, or potentially 2 more teams coming in. I honestly haven't got a clue. I mean, I've sort of while we're on air, I've got my Twitter feed up. I'm waiting for this Elite League statement to come out so we can stop guessing. But yeah, I don't think it's right that he can put something like that out, knowing full well what sort of reaction it's going to cause. And I see that the Fife have had to put out a statement today because of it, to state, look, we're not leaving the Elite League, because a lot of rumours were pointing to, that's not helpful, to be fair.
I mean, it is. I mean, Tino, it really is very cryptic, isn't it? Really, and a lot of people know that there is obviously the Elite League board meeting happened yesterday. Like sort of Ant just said, there's going to be fans out there that are potentially worried. Like he says, somebody from kind of like Fife press area has tweeted something. I mean, what do you make of it? What did you kind of think when you saw that tweet? What was the first thing that went through your mind when you read that tweet?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. I don't follow Dave Sims on Twitter, so it had to be pointed out to me. But it was retweeted by several other people that had seen it. I mean, obviously knowing that the Elite League board meeting has happened recently. I think unfortunately the poor old media guys are taking a bit of stick for it, Craig and Rob, because that's kind of it's kind of within their remit to get all that information out there, and the pair of them have got day jobs, so they're having to throw it all together. Once the job that actually pays their mortgages is out of the way, that's so we're all sort of sat here speculating, potentially for that very reason. But I think Dave Sims has added fuel to the fire. With that, whenever a board meeting happens, there is invariably a lot of chatter about what may or may not have been said. I mean, one of the things that Neil Black said yesterday, and I'm probably paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines of, he's fairly confident there will be 12 teams next season. So you sort of take from that they're in. That we're going to have a 12-team league. So, but yeah, putting a tweet out like that is. I mean, it's a bit contentious. I mean, the one thing I will say is, so some people use Twitter in that way, but they're not in as high profile a position as Dave Sims is. He's got an awful lot of followers within British ice hockey, but he's only human. If he's frustrated about something, he's probably going to tweet about it. I mean, I've done that in the past. I've maybe I've had a bad day at work and I've put a cryptic rant or something, and you sort of joke about it. People put the status on Facebook, had a really bad day, or want to cry right now, and then you get all the invariable "What's up, hon? Are you okay? Message me," blah blah blah. So, there is a certain amount of "Are you okay, mate?" about it. It's like you're obviously frustrated about something. Something's obviously gone, sort of slightly gone the way that he believes to be detrimental to well, I suspect to our league. I mean, that despite him, putting that it's a bad day for hockey, I don't think it'll have much of a repercussion in terms of leagues in other countries. I suspect it is probably contained within our league, but obviously one of the things that as Ant's pointed out, 5 Flyers have had to go, whoa, no, nothing to do with us. We're not going anywhere, honest. So it does get people a little bit jumpy, and I think there's been a couple of other tweets that have flown around from either owners or people involved with other clubs that have just added more fuel. It's a big. It's got a potential to be a forest fire if somebody doesn't put something out soon. And here's me quickly checking Twitter just to see if anything's come out while we're talking. So it's. I think that Dave Sims is only human, but I think he often forgets sort of how high profile his social media accounts are.
Well, talking of Twitter, we've had a tweet in from our good friend Johnny Bullard, and he says, it's a "look at me, I know something you don't" tweet, unprofessional. And Andy, that leads me on to Gary Mills' question. And Gary says, is it right that Dave Sims hints that there is some bad news coming on social media before an official EIHL announcement?
Probably not, but realistically, since the dawn of Twitter, or since the dawn of him joining Twitter, rightly or wrongly, he's been doing it. So I think, yes, there will always be the thoughts in the back of your mind. Obviously with the rumblings of Fife, and you sort of think if you were a Fife fan, you would be slightly concerned, and obviously that's why they've released what they've released in the press. But I think realistically, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, knowing where it's come from. Yes, he's a man who's in the know, but we see this all the time. Personally, I just take it as when something comes out, I'll see it. Let's face it, at times the league has been nothing short of a car crash. Anyway, in various guises and various different aspects. But, at the end of the day, until something official comes out, it's all rumours. And that's something that categorically as Panthers fans, we don't really ever tend to sort of deal in, as was mentioned last night in the Q&A by Neil Black. It's something that as a club, we won't entertain. The aspect of either talking about other team signings or fueling rumours or saying we tried to sign this player but he's turned us down. We'll announce things when it happens, and I think yes, that's the right way, but we can't stop other people doing it. But I just think you've got to take it with, like I say, with a bit of a pinch of salt, and just look at where it's coming from, and just like I say, just see what happens basically. One thing I will say is I think it's been worded very cleverly, in the sense that he says in history yesterday will go down as a bad day for hockey. Now, yes, I agree to an extent that there's every possibility that is aimed at our league, but there's also every possibility that he's on the wind-up and it's nothing to do with UK ice hockey whatsoever.
Yeah,
it's come after a board meeting. It's the perfect time to have a laugh and a joke. Whether it's right or wrong that a person in that position does it and worries people is another issue. The fact of the matter is, he hasn't specifically said anything about our league, about any teams. He's made a tweet about hockey in general. He could be. He might not be, but he could be an NHL team who lost last night.
True.
It could be
True.
anything like it could. I mean, it could just as easily be anything like that, and he's on the wind up.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
but
if you want to find out what this, sorry, Andy, but if you want to find out what the bad news is or what the announcement will be or is going to be, then just follow Dave Sims, because there's no doubt that he will be tweeting it before the official Elite League. But we'll move on. And obviously, if the Elite League or Dave Sims does tweet anything whilst we are still broadcasting, then we will let you know. But we'll move on to the last few questions now, and we'll go back to Lee Constable, his final question that he sent in via Facebook. And it's one to get your teeth stuck into, folks. So who should be cut from this team and who should stay? I think we have Spang, Brown and McGrattan and possibly all the Brits back. But who else stays and who goes? And if possible, what do you think we could bring in who do you think we could bring in, that is a Brit to improve our amount of Brits? So split that into two questions, and I'll come to you first. Neil Black said yesterday about the people that were, are sort of on two-year deals. Spang and Brown were mentioned. It's kind of known that McGrattan has a 2-year deal as well. But for you, who do you cut, and does anybody stay?
Not for me. I'd have a proper clear out. This team has proven time and again that it's it can do it. It just doesn't do it often enough. We need you need that consistency to be league challengers. We haven't got it. I mean, last night's game was an absolute barn burner. Players, were playing. Whether it had any effect that Mr. Black was in the house. But like Carter, for instance, had the best game I've seen him for a long, long time. But it's. I'm not going to say I dislike the team and what have you. I'm frustrated because you know the potential that is in that team. Like we saw from McMillan last year, he was one of our standout players for me. He was that sort of dirty goes into the corners forward. We've not had any of that this year. Dimon, when he's on, he's just calm and composed. And I likened him a lot to Corey when Corey was playing. But he's been in and out of the team with injuries and what have you this season and form and what have you. We've lamented about Lacko and Lee several times over the course of this season and previous seasons, and but with the limited Brit pool, what can you do? I mean, personally, I'd love to see us go for someone like Josh Batch. I think talking as we did earlier about that big physical presence at the back. Mm-hmm. And he's a bloody good player as well. I really rate him quite highly. I'd go for someone like that. But yeah, for me, other than the returnees, it's hard for me to say about Weekman as well, because when he's on, he's one of the best. But again, he lacks consistency and he's been unlucky with injuries. So can we afford to have a number one goalie that is going to miss a third or more of the season? I'm not sure.
Well, to bring in a couple of more questions so we tie this all in together, we've had another question in, and this one it refers to the Brits, and they say if Panthers were going to mix up their Brit players for next year, who would you like to bring in to improve the side? Clark can't go on forever. Lacko's not contributing enough, and Lee's form has been patchy all season. And then again, Dill1015 says, what would you do with our Brit pack in the summer? So we'll tie that into the previous question from Lee. So Tina, I'll come to you next. So starting with the team in general, who do you think should be cut, and do you think any of them should be re-signed? And then let's go to the Brit question of, if you could, what would you do with our Brit pack, and if you could bring one or two Brits into the Panthers, who would they be?
That's an awful lot to chew over, to be honest. I
told you it's one to get your teeth stuck into.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wonder if my teeth are big enough. Just bear with me. Yeah, I'm not too far away from, I think, what Ant was saying. Yeah, I think there's been quite a bit of inconsistency in the team, and I think there have been a few guys who have come in with a bit of fuss and fanfare and they haven't been able to translate their CV to their on ice production. So it's I don't think there are many imports that I would welcome seeing back next season. I would like to think that we can. I don't want to say do better, but I can't think of a better way to put it. Just as a side note, interestingly, me and my friend who I sit next to behind the away bench, we think we may have seen Jason Williams up in the commentary box last night wearing a sling. So
yes, I will back you up on that.
Yeah. So I couldn't think of anybody else it could have been, and and interestingly, he did tweet last night to say that his season may not actually be over. So that would be nice, to get hopefully get a fully fit Williams back on the ice for us, just to give us that little bit of a push towards playoffs. A fully fit Jason Williams, if providing we didn't break him, which is always entirely possible with the Panthers, it would appear. A fully fit Williams would be nice to have back again, I would say. I want to be in, and just another player I want to just sort of highlight imports wise. I want to be in Nicky Forrick's corner, but I think again there's the inconsistency. You can see that it's not for want of trying. He's getting out there. He's skating as fast as his little legs can carry him, and he's getting himself in some of the right places. But I think inconsistent is probably the word that hangs over this team in general. Not all the players, but just sort of in general. In terms of Brits, and I think I've probably said this before, I think a lot of them are quite settled, and I think you have to do an awful lot to tempt them away from their clubs. I think if you're gonna sign Brits that don't leave this country to go off and try and do bigger and better things, you've got to catch them before they get partners and settled and have kids and stuff, because they're less likely to want to go anywhere. I think it's quite the upheaval. You are essentially going to pack up your life, move to a new city, and you've got to. And you're doing that for a job that you're only doing for 6 months of the year, So it's, if you've already built up a life in the city where you are, and your off-season wage relies on you being in the city that you have settled in, then clubs have got to do an awful lot in terms of prizing them away. But it's not impossible. It's really not impossible. There are some quality Brits, and also there is going to be a little bit of a Brit shake-up. Assuming that Milton Keynes and Guildford are going to be both coming into the league. There's going to be some Brits that are probably going to trickle down. Or stay in the EPL, trickle down to the National League, and maybe there will be some. Obviously the teams are going to try and lock up the best ones to a contract, but there may be some Brits with potential that we can have a word with. Once upon a time we used to laud Corey Nielsen for his skill at developing British players, and it's not outside the realms of possibility that he could do that with a British player that somebody else maybe doesn't know how to get the best out of. This is a skill we know that Corey Nielsen possesses. So I think a lot, obviously a lot depends still on Guildford getting accepted. Milton Keynes we already know are coming. I think a lot depends on availability, contracts that are already in place, and also, I'll come back to it, how settled the Brit players are in their current with their current teams and within their current cities. It's not something I feel qualified to talk about in terms of who specifically we should be going for, but I think we need to consider everything that is going to happen during the summer in terms of the two teams that are coming to join us, and maybe, as I say, Corey Nielsen sort of getting back to that reputation that he has of developing good British players.
Andy, just finish us off on this sort of section about the team next year. Who would you cut, stay, and obviously your views on the Brit Pack and who you would like to target as the Panthers.
Well, I think out of obviously the imports that are already returning, so Brown, Spang, McGrattan, I think Neil Black said yesterday that there was one or two high-profile players that had already re-signed for next season, and that wasn't the two that are on the uni deals. So obviously McGrattan's one of them, because it was in that article that he was here for 2 years. So you've got to think realistically in this team, who else is high profile? You've got to think that probably Weekman's in that category, and Jason Williams, I think, are the two that you can sort of say are in that high profile. Schultz possibly, but I think he's probably just underneath that realistically. So you've got to be looking at Williams or Weekman. I take both of them back. I think Weekman's a very good goalie. I think he gets frustrated by what's in front of him a lot of the times, and I don't think that helps. But I think if you have a decent defence in front of him, I think he's one of the best netminders in the league. And Williams is different class, so you'd sign him. Other than that, realistically, we talk about how inconsistent our season's been and how inconsistent all the imports have been, bar one person who hasn't been mentioned, who has been consistent since day one, which is Lindhagen. The guy, night in, night out, does his job. Whether that's playing forward or defence. And I think, realistically, he would be the only other one that I'd look to re-sign. I said to someone at the game yesterday, actually, that if Stephen Schultz was your sort of third-line luxury player, you'd re-sign him, because when he's on the ice, he's a difference maker. He's a game changer. But I don't think you can justify signing a player with the injury record. And yes, it's not necessarily fair on him, but I don't think you can justify a player with that injury record as being your go-to guy for being your standout player, which realistically he has been in the past 2 years because of his ability. And yes, like I say, it might be unfair on him because of his injuries, but again, another thing Neil Black said yesterday was that he'd be looking at, he would be wanting players signed that didn't have, reoccurring or niggling injury problems. You got to think that that's not necessarily a slight, but obviously a sort of comment aimed at the players that we've had for the past couple of years who have sat an awful lot of games out. So realistically for me, Spang and Brown and McGrattan are coming back. I think Williams is probably the other one that's alluded to. I'd take Weekman and Lindhagen. The rest, they can all be upgraded on, realistically. I mean, you can argue that everyone can be upgraded on. But I think the 4 or 5 that we've got coming back already, you can say are of a decent enough standard and are of a good standard for this league. The rest of them, I quite like, especially recently, I quite like Andy Sertic, but he can be upgraded on. Nicky Foruk, he's good, but he can be upgraded on. Chris Lawrence is another one. He's one of these players that some people cannot abide, and other people, are besotted by him. But he can be upgraded on. Matt Carter is so nonchalantly skillful that if he was scoring 100 points a season, you could justify how he plays, but he's not. So he would go for me. He has a similar style in a sense to like a Ling or a Galbraith, in the sense that he doesn't particularly defend. He's very, calm and sort of loose with the puck, should we say. But Galbraith and Linger were putting up 90-odd points a year, so you don't mind the fact that he's not going to track back and there's going to be a goal scored because you know that he's going to get you 2 points a game. We're not seeing that from Carter. Brit-wise, I think, to be perfectly honest, you know, all the talk of who would you have and who would you go after, it is kind of pipe dream stuff. Yes, you get players of, obviously, Myers went back to Cardiff, but realistically, you know, he was always wanting to go back to Cardiff. He went back there and then he wasn't wanted, which was the only reason why he came back up here. You've got, obviously, Peacock was sort of like the shock one going to Bread this season. And obviously we lost Boxill a couple of years ago. But realistically, they're all set. And one of the things I thought that was interesting that Neil Black said yesterday was when someone asked about who's returning next year, and he said the majority of the Brits are all on multi-year deals.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know if that's common knowledge, but to me, that was news in some aspects. Yes, I know that Lacko had been on like a 3-year deal at one point, and I know Clarkey had signed a multi-year deal and things like that. But you've got to imagine that players like Josh Batch or you know, Mark Richardson at Cardiff, you've got to look at players like Dowd and O'Connor. You know, if they want to, ultimately, the teams aren't going to give them up. So realistically, they will either be on multi-year deals or they will be being spoken to now by the clubs that they're already at, looking at getting them re-signed because Brits don't go on trees, as was stated yesterday. The Brit pool at the moment is probably the weakest it's ever been. And that doesn't mean that there's not young, hungry players in the leagues below that are wanting to give it a go. But, you know, as was mentioned again yesterday, we can't... The league itself is a lot more competitive. We're going to be in the CHL next year. You know, realistically, can you justify having a couple of young kids, you know, playing important minutes in those type of games? You know, Betteridge has done a decent job this year, but he's not Matthew Myers. And, you know, it will be incredibly difficult to replace Matthew Myers because of what he brings and how good he is and how established he was. And there's not that type of player out there at the moment, British-wise. Again, it will be incredibly difficult to replace David Clark when David Clark goes. Because how many other Brits are there in the league that, you know, if they played a full 54 games, are going to get you, you know, 25, 30 goals a year? There's not many in the league.
Nope.
And the ones that are in the league aren't going to be available to pick up unless they're of the opinion of holding teams out to the highest bidder and just going to an auction house. So you say, well, you know, I'm happy to leave Club X, but they're offering me this much money. What can you do?
Well, sorry, Andy. I just say we've had a tweet in, and obviously it comes from Panthers 6233 Sam, and he just says that I'd take back Boxall with very open arms. But I think as all of you have said, you know, Brits. And you just said it there, Andy. They don't grow on trees, and I must admit I was quite surprised when Neil Black said that most of, if not all of, the Brits are on multi-year deals and are going to be back next year. That was something that surprised me, and I'm just going to start to wrap this up, folks, because we've been on for about an hour or so, and I'm just going to ask all of you, just to, obviously the Q&A last night, people have been talking about it all day on forums, on Twitter, etc., etc. So I'm going to come to all of you and just, you know, was it what you expected? And then just finally, what is the one thing that you take away from it? Whether that's something that Neil Black said that you were surprised at, or what was the one highlight, if there was one for you, that you took away from last night? And I'll come to you first.
I think I've already covered it with the training camp starting as early as it is next season, and you know, it seems like we're actually proper preparing for a season for once. And
so, do you believe that? Do you believe that's what is going to happen?
Who knows? It's a long way away. August is a long way away. We're still not finished this season yet. we shall see. You've got to hope, haven't you? I mean, you can't go into these things just assuming that everything somebody says is going to be rubbish or a lie, like some people have done. But likewise, you've got to sort of try and read between the lines when they don't give you the sort of politician's answer, if you like, by not answering the question. But yeah, that was the biggest thing for me, and it was also an eye opener for me when he was going on about the players that are signed to like all the different leagues, and you can't just happily move between the leagues. Like an elite league team can't sign a couple of players from the EPL on two-way contracts and just call them up as and when. They have to be like signed in and out, and there's 2-week delays, and also that seems ridiculous to me. If that is the case, and UK hockey needs to have a serious look at itself, because the game's never going to progress if we're stuck like that.
I mean, Andy, I'll come to you next. You were in the VIP seats right at the front. What did you take away from it, and one highlight for you?
Well, the highlight was seeing that you were in the royal box, mate. Ultimately, realistically, I got out of it exactly what I imagined I'd get out of it. There was things that I found out that I didn't know. To put a point on what Ant said regarding calling players up and down in various leagues, they have to be with a team for a certain amount of days before they can go back down and play again and things like that. But for all the, not necessarily animosity, but for all the questions that were asked that were always going to be dubious in terms of answers, I've saw that people were not happy with the responses that Neil Black gave, but did people expect anything different? So, pointing at things like, our league form hasn't been good, which he agrees with, he agrees wholeheartedly with. I think it's the coach's fault. I think it's the GM's fault. What are you going to do about it? Neil Black was never going to turn around and say, you know what, I think you're right. Just bear with me a second while I nip next door, and I'll go sack them both, and that type of thing. He gave answers that realistically he was always going to give in that situation. So I don't quite know what people expected in terms of those type of questions, but I think some of the questions that were asked, particularly about the supporters trust and the webcast, I thought he gave really good answers in response to them. He said point blank, no, we will not be doing webcasts, and gave his reasons why. Whether you agree with him or not, he's given you his answer. He's told you his reasons. So, that's what's going to happen. With the supporters trust, they asked about, whether they'd be spoken to or taken seriously and that type of thing. And he said, look, he admires the passion, and obviously if they can get together and sort some good ideas out and get in touch with the club, they will listen. But until that happens, then, what difference does it make to them? They asked about would there be representation at their meeting, and he just said no. And it's those type of answers that, to me, you sort of get the sort of, not necessarily respect, but you get the most out of, in the sense that he's told you an answer that you might not like, but he's given you reasons for it, and that's all you can ask for, in my opinion.
Tina, just finally, your thoughts on the Q&A and the highlight for you?
I don't know if there was a particular highlight. I mean, the one thing I will say, it was fair play to him for getting up there. There was nobody else involved. There was no other club officials there. It was just one man with a microphone giving answers to questions. It must have been. I sort of imagine standing up there, having people firing questions at me. Some of them, being, obviously being quite angry because they're not happy with the state of the club. It could have, it could have gone. It could have gone really badly, and it didn't. He didn't. I mean, there was a little bit of question dodging. There was a sort of, there were a few sort of politicians' responses, but the thing that kind of struck me was, I think that I believe that Neil Black wants the league to be a priority, but I also believe that he doesn't meddle in on-ice affairs. I genuinely believe that he doesn't have anything to do with that. So, whilst he probably wants to win the league, he wants the culture to exist within the club to make winning the league the priority. There's only so much control that he himself can have over that. He can filter the edict down through the masses, in the Panthers office, and hope that gets through to the guys on the ice. But there's only so much that he can do on that sort of subject. I was a little bit disappointed. But, personally, he's given his responses, he's given his reasons why, but I was a bit disappointed that webcasts are still not a consideration. I don't think it has to be every game. You don't have to just sort of say, yeah, we're going to do a webcast for every game. It doesn't have to work like that. But I think some fans who were never going to travel down here, let's take the Scottish teams, Belfast as an example. I think they would appreciate it, and that's for some neutral fans. Last night, I think that would have been £8 made. But if that's the decision, that's the decision. We don't meddle in the finances of the Nottingham Panthers. We don't control the finances of the Nottingham Panthers, and that is something that obviously Neil Black has to consider.
Well, if you are listening to this at any point and going, what the hell are they talking about? What was the Q&A with Neil Black, etc., then fear not, because Neil very kindly let us, and also obviously the Saltbox were very kind to let the Cat's Whiskers record the whole excuse me, the whole Q&A with Neil Black, and you can find that on our website. Just head to thecatswhiskersonline.co.uk or check out our Twitter handle @CatsWhiskersTV, and you will find it on there. All the Q&A, as I say, was recorded, so you can listen to all the questions that were asked, and you can listen to Neil Black's answers to them. You might not like them, but I think, as Tina said at the very beginning of her little piece there, fair play to him for actually doing it. And for me, I would just say that I think, for a long time now, Panthers fans have asked for something like this. As Tina said, as you said, Tina, he was there. He was on his own, nobody around him, no fuss, just him and a microphone. And I would also just kind of say, look, and, Tina, you mentioned the webcast. For me, I think, let's not have any more questions on webcasts on Ask TCW, because it's pretty obvious what the club stance is on webcasts. We're never going to do webcasts unless we're selling out every game. So I think that's been put to bed. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, that's obviously another matter. But I think at least now we know our club stance when it comes to webcasts. I would also say it's been really interesting for me just reading like the Cage today afterwards, and people. I think there's definitely over 50% of people that still aren't impressed, still aren't happy, etc. There's talk of him not kind of knowing what's going on in his club day to day, etc. Well, for me, you don't. If you own a boat, you don't hire a captain and then choose to sail the ship yourself. There's people that we have at our club to run that club on a day-to-day basis. At the end of the day, he is the owner of the club. He's not the day-to-day manager of that club. But please do listen to the Q&A, and for the next, whenever you're listening to it, get in touch with us. Let us know your views, because I'm sure we will talk about it on future podcasts. But for this evening, I will just say thank you very much to Andy.
No worries at all.
Thank you very much to Ant.
Not a problem. Speak to you later.
And thank you very much to Tina.
TTFN.
And finally, thank you very much for everybody sending in their questions. And thank you very much for listening. And you will hear us very soon on the next Cat's Whiskers podcast live.